I am Sam Young, Managing Director of Plan Giving and Strategic Advisor at Compassionate Choices. Hello and welcome to our exclusive Legacy webinar, where we will cover various topics surrounding effective end of life planning. Our objective is to provide you with sound information that allows you to create the legacy you desire. Compassionate Choices is the oldest 501c3 nonprofit organization with a mission to improve care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their end of life journey. We envision a society that affirms life and accepts the inevitability of death, embraces expanded options for compassionate dying, and empowers everyone to choose the end of life care that reflects their values, priorities, and beliefs. Compassionate Choices has 450,000 supporters and is active in all 50 states, Washington, D.C., Guam, and Puerto Rico. Today, we are honored to have Kimberley Pittman-Schulz, who focuses on grief and life transitions and is a noted mentor, trusted advisor, and author. Kimberley helps people struggling with grief to reimagine life after the loss of someone they love. She brings a unique perspective to her work after investing 20 plus years in the philanthropic sector, showing people how to do meaningful end of life planning. She shifted focus during the pandemic to working with individuals and small groups, supporting them on their journey with grief. Experiencing her first major loss as a child, followed later in life with multiple losses resulting in prolonged grief, she created her own process for finding her way back into a life of joy and well-being. Through her book, Grieving Us, a field guide for living with loss without losing yourself, a #1 new release on Amazon upon publication, she's sharing her process with thousands worldwide. She's also a deeply committed CNC legacy donor. Let's begin our special dialogue, and please feel free to share your questions and personal experience with us in the chat. Kimberley, I'd like to start with a question and just get some of your views on some things up front. The first question I have for you is, working with grieving people, even at Compassionate Choices, not just on gift planning, what have you learned about grief?
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Sam, and welcome everyone here, by the way. I just want to say how much I appreciate Compassionate Choices inviting me to be here, and I look forward to providing some resources through this conversation with you that will be helpful. I've learned so much. I mean, we all grieve differently. And as I've come to work with people over time and find my own way, my own pathway back to me, um, I have been able to help other people. I have been able to help people frame their legacy, as well as, not only philanthropically, but just in terms of finding meaning in their life, even when it seems like you'll never really live again. I mean, when you've had a very deep loss, it can feel like my life is over. So the #1 thing I've learned is that joy and grief coexist, and grief, well, we'll talk about that more when we get into a little further along, but grief doesn't have to be always and forever. The loss can be enduring, but it really is possible to find a pathway back to a new version of yourself.
That's wonderful. I just want to clarify, I misspoke. The Q&A is open for your questions, not the chat, and only Kim and I will see it. So Kimberly and I will see it. So sorry about that. One more question, and then I'm just going to turn it over for you for your presentation. A lot is going on in the world currently. How do you talk about the loss of a loved one when there's also conflict in the world that creates grief? And I'm going to let you go from here.
Oh my gosh. Well, that is really a timely question. Um, there is so much going on at any one time. And of course, right now, I think we are very much feeling loss. Am I coming through okay? I just want to make sure that my screen is coming through. All right. I don't hear
Yes,
any no's.
we can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Okay, very good. My screen just did something funny. The joys of technology, right? I'd love to be here in person with everyone. Um, so there's this backdrop right now of so much happening in the world. I mean, in reality, there's always something going on in the world. But what happens, I think, much like going through the pandemic, where our own mortality became front and center, and we realized how vulnerable our lives can feel, I think, against the backdrop of conflicts around the world, let alone whatever else is happening in our communities or the political landscape or our own health landscape. Those kind of compound feelings of loss. So those in and of themselves can be sources of deep grief. But then if you have lost someone or lost a beloved animal companion, or you're losing elements of yourself due to health or whatever may be happening in your life, when you have a backdrop of what I call communal loss, where we're all feeling and seeing and witnessing losses in the world around us, whether that's world with a little w right in front of us or a world with a big W, meaning the globe, it really does magnify whatever personal losses we have. And our personal losses can kind of magnify the impact of all of that difficult news coming in through the news feed, through our televisions and our cell phones, because the world likes to report on the bad news. And so we have to work a little harder to find the good news and the nurturing news.
Thank you, Kimberly. We have one question that I'd like to put out there is how can you help someone with dementia grieving?
Could I ask that we maybe take that toward that question toward the end? That's a huge question. And
Yes.
I definitely have loved ones dealing with early and moderate stages of dementia. So, I'm finding my own pathway through that process. So what I'd like to do is if we could hold some of those fairly big questions toward the end, I think that might be helpful because there may be some other related questions there too. Would that be okay?
Yeah, and I'm going to let you outline your pathways, and I'm going to hold all the questions till the end now, and just let you
Okay.
start with your presentation.
All right, sounds good. And again, I just want to say welcome here. Thank you for being here. What I'd like to do and I don't want to be a talking head for an hour. We are going to have time for questions and answers, and to learn from each other. But what I'd like to do is to just take a moment. I'd like to invite you to take a moment to take in a breath with me. And here's what I'd like to suggest that we do is we take a moment to breathe in slowly and deeply through our nose, feeling it down in our abdomen or belly if that's comfortable for you, and then to have a long, slow out breath because that's not just woo-woo, that actually does calm the body, calm the nervous system, and help us settle into this nearly hour that we'll be together. But I'd like you to do something special because most of us here are grieving someone that we love or a beloved animal or grieving something, maybe, like I said, even ourselves. What I'd like to invite you to do is take a breath in, and we'll do this together, but I'm inviting you to take a breath in. And as you take that breath in, think of that one that you love and just whisper or think, thank you, thank you. And then as you breathe out, I'd like to invite you to think or say, I'm still here. I'm still here. So let's do that together, eyes open or closed. So I'm going to close my eyes just for a minute and let's take an in-breath. Thank you. I'm still here. Did you do that? I hope those of you who did, I hope that it is supportive. And like I said, there's a method to the madness, and that in of itself, that's like the first thing I'd like to give to you is that practice in and of itself is a practice you can use anytime, taking a slow, deep breath in to the extent that it's comfortable, right? But I like to breathe as deeply into my stomach, my abdomen as possible, and then to breathe out slowly through your nose or your mouth, and to breathe in that gratitude for the one you love and having them in your life, and to breathe out a reminder to yourself that you are still here. I can't tell you how critical it is and how important it is. It's so easy to take our own lives for granted. And sometimes we may not even want to continue going on when we've lost someone that has been such a deep and meaningful part of our life, right? But it's important to remind ourselves that you are still here. And as long as you still are here, there is so much possibility for your life, for your well being that you might not see right now, but you are still here. And there's just more for you to do and more for you to be. There is a next version of yourself. Okay. So what I was asked to talk about today is sort of this idea of finding your pathway back to you. Now, when I work with grieving people or people working through trauma, I do help people with post-traumatic growth and a range of other kinds of losses too. It may not necessarily be death. Like I said, we have health conditions. It could be onset of dementia. It could be congestive heart failure or cancer or MS. There's so many things that we may be dealing with that create a sense of loss and grief. And the thing I hear most often, though, especially when we're talking about the death of someone we love or the impending death of someone we love, is I miss them so much. I miss them so much. And the second thing I hear is, how do I live with loss without losing myself? And those were the questions that I experienced. As Sam shared, I had a very early loss as a toddler. And then at midlife, I had two losses within 2 weeks of each other. One was a beloved family member, the other a suicide of a friend that kind of left me in that prolonged grief. And I tried just about everything and sort of stumbled into my own pathway back to me, that I've since shared with others informally, just as, human being to human being. And now I've made it my life's work. But I want you to know that while our lives change, so much of who we are, our sense of identity, is tied to the people, the beloved animals, and the environment that we're in. I'm in Northern California. 5 years ago, Paradise, California was pretty much obliterated, burned to the ground. So you can have these community-wide losses and that loss of just your own community. So it can happen on so many levels. Certainly Lahaina and Maui is experiencing that. Places around the world recovering from everything from wars to earthquakes to we're still kind of parts of the world still very much moving through COVID and trying to figure out from where. So I want to talk with you about the process that I've come up with. I've just sort of built from my own experience based on science and studies and what's known in the research. So it is science-backed, but also just what I've learned from the people I work with, because that's, human beings are really the best source of information. Human beings who have been through this have found their way forward. What I'd like to have you do and to keep in mind is to, as we go through this time together, try to identify one key insight or one discovery or one aha that you can take away from this time together. I'll be sharing a range of ideas, information that may be new to you, but so often we come to something like this, we might have a meaningful experience, and then we kind of go on with the rest of our lives. And I would love for this time together to really leave you with something that you can take and try to apply within your own life, okay? So please keep that in mind. So let's talk a little bit about grief. Of course, there's how we would like the journey to be, right? We would really like the journey to be that we could just kind of go around the heartbreak. We could go around the dark emotions of grief. But the reality is, grief is more the messy journey. It's the backward, it's the forward, it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, sometimes 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, and then 6 steps forward. It can be messy. There's no timeline for it. And the journey is individual, even though I would say it's a much easier journey to navigate if you can navigate it with someone else. So here's the point I want to make about that, which is grief actually helps us heal our life. It actually heals our life. Grief is not the bad guy, and grief is not even one thing. Grief is a whole kaleidoscope of emotions. It is that sense of sorrow, that deep longing. It can feel like numbness, that sort of who cares. It can feel like regret. It can feel like anger. It can feel like shame, but it also can feel like hope. It can feel like possibility. We tend to feel, especially early on in a loss, we'll feel more of the darker, more difficult, more painful emotions. But grief really it really has a purpose, which is to help us heal our lives. But there's an important aspect. I often hear people say to me, "Oh, Kimberly, everyone tells me time will heal, and it's been a couple years, and I still hurt so bad." People will often get some very good support early on through individual therapy or counseling or group support programs that are really helpful at certain points in their grief journey, but often leave them feeling like they can cope through some rough patches, but coping feels fundamentally different from really living and thriving. And so the question I like to ask, is what do you believe about your life? When I ask people, do you believe you can live again? Do you believe you can be happy? What do you believe about your own life? And so often when we look in the mirror, the question is, do I look in the mirror and, am I that lion? Do I see a big future? Do I see more for myself? Or, do I see less for myself? Do I see that, this is as good as it's ever going to get? And while there are certainly people that, due to their health status or, physical conditions, maybe they are going to struggle to get to a better place of well-being or even just feeling okay again. For most of us, what we believe about our possibility to heal our lives after the death of someone we love, or other kinds of grief and loss and trauma, makes a big impact. So one of the questions I would ask you to kind of have in the back of your mind is to ask yourself, can I know joy again? Can I feel happy again? Is it possible for me to know joy again? Like I said, so often people say to me, I don't think I can ever be happy. Some people even feel that it wouldn't be right. How can I be happy when someone I love has died? How can I feel joy when someone I love has died? Um, but I want to expand that thinking a little bit. First, I want to just real quick word about joy. There's so many definitions of joy, so many definitions of joy, and it is related to being happy, but there is a difference. I like to ride on roller coasters. Haven't done it in a long time, but if I ride on a roller coaster, it makes me happy. It makes me happy. That is, until a little while, then I want to get back in line and go ride the roller coaster again. So the thing with happiness is it's usually something from the outside. We say it makes us happy. It comes from the outside. We feel good for a while. And it's a beautiful distraction, right? Joy is more of an inner work. It comes from within. And even if you can't feel it right now, we all have reserves of joy. And sometimes the challenge is just learning how to tap into that. But joy is really, it doesn't mean you're going to be dancing on the rooftop 24/7, 365. It's really about having moments in each day where you feel connected to your own life, connected to the world around you, connected to the people that you love and who love you, both the ones that are still here and the ones who may be gone. It's feeling a sense of meaning and purpose. It doesn't mean you know what your purpose is, but you feel like you are living with a sense of purpose. It's just that sort of being okay and realizing that, like the world today, we can look around at the world and feel like it's a very dark place. And yet it's not Pollyanna at all to say, but I can still find joy there. I can look around the room and find something that helps me feel centered again, helps me feel okay, even if for just a little while. The whole world doesn't have to be okay, but you can often find that in this moment, like right now as I speak, I have a lot going on in my life, but right now, you know what? I'm okay. I'm actually better than okay. I feel blessed to be here with all of you. So I want to also plant the seed that joy also, like grief, part of the grief process, sort of the backside of grief, it also helps you heal. People will say to me, how long do I have to be in grief before I can feel joy? And you know what my answer is? You don't have to wait to go through grief. You don't have to go through grief to get to joy. Joy isn't a destination. It's actually a dimension. It's there. It's just learning how to tap into it and how to invite it back into your life. Okay? So let's jump into this pathway back to you process. I'm going to share with you the 4 grief releasing pathways process. It's a framework that I've created. And again, it's science backed and based on just human history and what works for people and what I've learned working with people going through the grieving process. So let me just introduce it. There are, 4 parts. I'm a poet before anything else. And so I love to work with symbolism and metaphor. And in this case, as I came to understand these 4 pathways that we go through when we are grieving, I turned to the four elements. Now in the Eastern tradition, there's 5. So this is more of a Western tradition approach. But it seemed to fit what I was seeing in working with people and what I was seeing with myself as I've gone through grief. So I want to say that we go through all four pathways. We go through all four pathways. But here's the thing, there is usually one pathway where we can get stuck. There's usually one pathway where we can get stuck. And ironically, the obstacle is the way forward, as Marcus Aurelius said. The obstacle is the way forward, meaning that part where we feel stuck and we might feel inclined to want to push away, that's actually where we want to focus more of our attention to help us be able to heal and to step further forward into our life. And I'm not talking about moving on. It's really about, we are moving forward. You know, it was 1:30 here a little while ago. Now it's what time? 1:50. Okay. So whether we want to or not, time, at least in this universe, is that we know is moving us forward. So the question is, how do we move forward with a sense of purpose? So we utilize all these four pathways, but one of them is often where we get stuck. So let me introduce the first one, and that is the earth pathway. The earth pathway. And the earth pathway is about sensory healing. So what do you mean when you say earth? You know, I've had people say, what does earth have to do with grieving? Well, again, it's metaphorical, but the idea is if you, as a matter of fact, I developed a self-quiz to help people identify which of these four pathways is the place where they get stuck. And so if you're someone who gets stuck in that earth pathway, and that is my pathway, actually, this is where I get stuck when I am grieving or dealing with difficult things in my life. What that means is I tend to feel disconnected from my body, from my life, from the world around me. And what helped me all those years ago when I was stuck in that prolonged grief, find my way back to me, a different version of me, but me again, was using sensory healing and something I call a tiny come back to your senses ritual to help me just actually get connected to the moment. It's a sort of a mindfulness oriented approach. So the first pathway is this idea of some of us just get really disconnected from ourselves and the world around us, can feel very numb. And we do hold grief and loss and trauma in our bodies. And so for most of us, it's important that we involve not only our body, not only our emotions and our mind, but also our bodies in the grieving process. Because while we tend to think of grief as emotional, much of it actually starts with what we're thinking, our thought patterns, and that tends to get the emotions going. And that, you know, that can physically, some of us literally have a hard time breathing. Broken heart disease is a real thing where people can literally be sick with grief physically. So that's sort of a little sample of what the earth pathway is about. The next pathway is what I call the water pathway. And that's about empathy and compassion and connection. So when people take the grief pathway self-quiz and they come up as a water pathway, it's about the flow of relationships. That's why I use water. It's about that flow of relationships. And you know what the first relationship is that we need to work on? The relationship with ourselves. So the idea here is people who come up as a water pathway are often people who may be dealing with self-blame, guilt, those I wish I would have, I wish I should have, I wish I could, I call it shoulding on yourself, because you feel like you should have done something, you wish you'd said something. It can be this feeling that no one's supporting me, feeling very unsupported by the people around them that are still in their lives, and feeling like, no one really understands them or can be there for them. So it's really has a lot to do with the relationship with yourself and with others, and starting with yourself as empathy and then expanding that empathy outward. In fact, giving and philanthropy are one path or one practice, actually. And by philanthropy, I don't necessarily mean giving. It can mean giving of your time. But once you've begun to experience empathy for yourself, to look at how you can give back is one way to actually push through this particular pathway. So I'm going to keep going, and we will have time for questions. I promise. I know this is a lot to take in. But that brings us to the fire pathway. And so the fire pathway is about belief shifting. We talked just a few moments ago about what do you believe? If you really believe, I work with a lot of people who are later in life when they lose perhaps a spouse that's been a part of their life for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and this feeling that it's too late for me to start over. And belief shifting is interesting because we can have beliefs we don't know we have, right? If you ask a fish, tell me about the water you're in. What kind of water are you in? Now, fish, as far as I know, can't speak. Not to say that I probably have talked to fish. I probably have. I'm that kind of person, but they've never answered me back. But if they could talk, I know that they would say probably what water? What water? What do you mean, what water? They don't even know they're in it, right? And so when we're grieving, we can have mindsets and beliefs about what's possible for our lives or what we should have done or what we could do that actually hold us back. And I call it the fire pathway because that's that internal fire. This is where we might lose that sense of purpose or meaning or the idea that there's more for us. We've kind of lost that fire inside. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And that's why I call that the fire pathway. And then this last pathway I call the air pathway because it is ephemeral. I tend to think of birds, and I am a bird person, bird lover. And that is what I call embracing your beloved. And so people who find their air pathway is the most challenging are often people who feel such a sense of longing that it's just hard for them to imagine stepping forward into something else in their life. They're just overwhelmed with the pain of missing their beloved other. And there are ways, there are ways of sort of taking the ones we love with us into our life and carrying them forward into our life as a nurturing presence, right? Some of us are told, I know there have been people in my life at times who have told me, Kimberly, they're behind you, leave them behind you, move on, move on. Well, and once upon a time, I can tell you the psychologists and psychiatrists years ago, that used to be the philosophy, and some cultures still have a philosophy like that. And if the relationship was traumatic or abusive, that may actually be really good advice. But in reality, what science shows and really what human history has shown is that when we can find a way to hold on to the ones we love in new ways, they're not a physical presence, but there are other ways to hold on to them and take them with us. Well, in those cases, we are then able to be nurtured by them. And yes, it does take time to get from the point of when I think of my beloved, I feel pain to when I think of my beloved other, I mostly feel nurtured. So that is the air pathway. That's sort of almost spiritual for some of us as well. So I just want to pause for a second. I do want to share a little bit about pathway practices and translate a little bit of this into, okay, what do I do with this information? But I thought if there's anything burning about what I've just shared with you, maybe we want to take any questions specific to this pathway process before we step a little bit further. Do you see anything, Sam, in the Q&A that relates to what I shared that maybe needs some clarification before we move forward?
Yes.
I'm not hearing anything right now.
I'm sorry, I just had to take it off mute. Let me go back and just having my
No
technical.
problems.
In discussing the 4 pathways, you said people end up here for each of the pathways. Sorry. Please expand on this.
I'm not sure I understand the question. And is the question around my phrase, a phrasing of ending up, or
They put up
how do we
end up here for each of the pathways. So I guess it's how do you feel they end up in one of the pathways? You said, they end up in one in the focus in the block.
right? Right.
So,
So how does that, the way I help people figure this out for themselves, and people who work with me help figure out, is I use a self quiz. It's a video quiz actually that explains this a little bit. And then people answer a series of questions. And by the way that certain questions are answered, it kind of conveys whether or not, I'm more, someone's more of a water pathway, and what they're really struggling with is that flow of relationships with themselves or with the people around them, or whether it's that fire pathway where they're sort of being blocked by their belief system. So there are some behaviors and questions that kind of are clues to where someone might fall. But again, I've also had people take the quiz and take it at different times in different places in their process and come up with different, and they come out a little bit differently. And that's because they may have made progress in one pathway and now they're stuck somewhere else. We actually use all 4 pathways, but there are some, like I said, where we tend to get hung up. And that determining that is really a series of sort of questions and looking at just behaviors and where our minds are around our loss. I hope that helps a little bit.
Kimberly, there's two questions that would like you to expand on belief shifting and explain it a little more.
Sure. And thank you for the question, because belief shifting is a big one. And I think, we often hear right now a lot of the world, especially in the coaching and counseling, there is a lot of focus right now on the idea of limiting beliefs. And sometimes just that phrasing can almost become like a stock phrase, that's so used that people kind of, what does that mean? But when I talk about belief shifting, I'm not talking about, we're going to, convert you to something else. It's not any kind of a conversion or anything dark and deep in that sense, but it's about, again, I think I can think of one of my clients. She's later in life and feels like it's too late for me to start my life. I lost, in her case, two family members that were deeply close to her. And she's like, it's too late for me. It's just too late. And I led her through a series of questions to really validate, is it really too late? Is it really too late to be happy again? Is it really too late to find another version of you? Like, who you are is forever different, right? Because like I said, our relationships actually help shape our sense of identity, our roles. If you've lost a child, what does it mean to be a mother? If you lost a spouse or a partner, what does it mean to be, a wife or a husband or a partner? So when I talk about shifting beliefs, it's about questioning some of those beliefs that could really be standing in the way of well-being, of feeling joy again, of seeing new possibilities, of creating that next version of yourself that is different, because you're a different person without this beloved other in your life, but you are still here. You have more to do and to be. I really, truly believe we each come into the world to give something that only we can give, that life happens through us. And so even if we feel like we don't want to be here anymore, if we can shift some of our beliefs about what's possible for our life. So that's what I mean by belief shifting. It can also look like things, feeling really guilty. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? That comes up also in some other places, in some other pathways. And these pathways are all interconnected. But sometimes people feel responsibility for the death of their beloved other when it really isn't it really isn't their fault. It really isn't. But that becomes a huge obstacle to feeling good about themselves and therefore to being good about being alive. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Good. We have a lot of questions. I'm just going to go through them, and we'll get to as many as we can. I
Okay.
would just ask, Kimberly, someone asked to show the water slide. Would you be okay if we asked you we could send out with the recording your slides? Would that be okay?
Yes, I can get you I can get you there. I can put this up for now, if you want to take a, look at that. And that, again, it's about empathy, compassion. And what's also should be on the slide is connection with yourself, connection with the people in your life, where the air pathway is about a continuing connection, the one you love and have lost. The water pathway is about that flow of current relationships and your relationship with yourself.
Thank you, Kimberly. The next question is a therapist needed for these pathways?
That's a good question. This isn't something I've shared with the therapist world. Like I said, this is a framework I've developed to support myself and the clients and the people that I work with in programs and just share. And I really kind of formulated a lot of this after working with people and some of the questions that came up, and actually working with a coach myself, saying, you have actually landed on a framework here. You need to name it. You need to give it shape and help and put it out there, because I've never heard people doing what you're doing and helping people the way you're helping. So it's a framework that, I haven't, if you open up a textbook in, psychology, you're not going to find this framework, but the underpinnings, the reality of finding ways to hold on to the one you love as you step forward into your life, absolutely science-backed. Definite science that shows if you are able, and again, unless the relationship is traumatic or abusive, in some cases you do not necessarily want to take that relationship with you, but when you can hold on to someone in a way that is generally nurturing for you, it actually accelerates your life healing process. And I don't say grief healing because grief isn't an illness, but it's about, healing your life to a point that you can feel okay. Having said that, I think you could take this kind of information, and if you are working with a therapist and said, "Hey, I heard this lady with C&C, and they laid out this framework, and these are some of the things she said. How might I work with you around this?" The concepts are going to be familiar. It's just the way I framed it that might be like, I haven't seen that framed quite that way before. So I hope that helps.
Kimberly, I'm going to read the question specifically, but I also want to note that Kimberly is sharing her pathways with us, but there's also the opportunity to reach out to her. She has a variety of programs, a variety of resources. So it may be that as you approach this, and if you like it, there may be an opportunity to talk to Kimberly further about her work with this, because she is a life coach as well. Having said that, that was just my personal view, but I want to move forward with my life, but I'm feeling stuck at times because my love for my beloved other who passed away. How do I reassure myself that I'm heading in the right direction when I feel such sadness when I try to move forward?
God, again, there's so many ways, and without being able to sit down and unpack that a little bit more, it's a little bit hard to say. There is some truth that the closer you are into the loss, the harder it is to see, the murkier it is. I say that grief, a lot of people say grief is forever, and I will say that I disagree with that framing. I think you are going to have grief that comes and goes. I say my experience, and again, what science and history show, when you've actually studied this, is that again, grief is meant to help you integrate the loss and be able to move forward in your life. So what that means is for me, the way I describe it is as being tidal, Tidal, like the ocean, like tidal currents. When you first have a loss, it feels like tidal wave after tidal wave, and you feel like you're never going to come up for air or breathe. And you can physically feel that way. I mean, you can physically feel like I can't breathe, I'm choking. It can be a very visceral feeling. And again, with time, but also with intention toward saying to yourself, and I've got to tell you, Sam, and the person asking this question, how often people will say to me, I don't want to get better. I don't want to, I'm not ready for that. And that's okay. That's their choice. That is absolutely their choice. But if you're saying to yourself, for me, I heard a little voice inside, a tiny little voice inside saying, isn't there more for me? And the answer that I heard back was yes. So if you're feeling like, yes, I want to keep living as painful this is, just realize that in the early phases of grief, you are going to just feel like you're in a tidal wave. But as you make some intentional moves in time and you step further into your own life on your own pathway, some of those deep feelings and the darker feelings of grief will start to subside. You're still going to have waves that come up. And I can tell you, I had, the loss I suffered as a 3.5-year-old at age 33 came back like a giant tidal wave. There's a reason for that. I won't go into it. And I found myself grieving in a very different way at a very different place in my life with a very different understanding of what happened. So I think when people say grief is forever, that's what they mean, is that it can come back like a sneaker wave. But the way that you're going to know that you're doing better is just by, and again, that's especially if you have a sensory ritual, to just be able to center yourself in a moment. If you have moments where you're saying, like for me, after 2 years of deep grief, and I had this moment by the river, and I was walking back to the house, and I said to myself, oh my gosh, in that moment, I felt okay. Okay doesn't sound like much to a lot of people, but if you really in sorrow, okay feels really good. So when you start to have moments like that, or you catch yourself like, oh my gosh, I went through the whole afternoon and I didn't think about him or her. Sometimes there's guilt for that and you have to catch yourself. But that's also a step of, it's okay. It's actually okay. And actually healing, because you're probably going to think about him. You're thinking about him now, right? You just had that aha moment. So there'll be those kinds of small signs. I need to spend time with the person asking the question to really be able to answer it for him or her or them specifically. But I hope that helps everybody. I'm trying to answer questions because I know if one person asks, there's at least 10.
Thank you. This next one brings up a lot of things. I'm approaching the first anniversary of my son's death. After 5 years of battling cancer, he used medical aid in dying. Our entire family was together, and it was a beautiful process. A memory which provides comfort daily. I'm getting choked up too. I am feeling like my grief is becoming more intense. Is this normal as a first anniversary approaches?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I find that most people have dates, like specific dates, and that some people call it a death anniversary. I kind of don't like that phrase, but some people call it that. But when you get to that landmark, oh my gosh, this has been 1 year. Birthdays, special holidays where you suddenly have a place missing at the table. I had a client where she interacted with her beloved other every Thursday at 4 o'clock, a phone call. It's been years now, but every Thursday at 4 o'clock. And we talk about, those becomes gaps in your life because, those were moments that you were either with your beloved other or you were thinking about them or you were texting them or you were packing their lunch or ironing their shirt or fixing their car. And those become little gaps where grief can creep in. Now, what I would say is, again, grief's purpose is to help us heal our lives. So I sometimes try to think about grief like a visiting relative, that sometimes it's going to stay. And sometimes if it's real painful, it might feel like a relative you really don't want to stay around very long, but you hold it and you embrace it and you feel it because that pain is love. That's the thing, is if you didn't love, it would be so less painful. But who among us wants to go through life without loving, right? So yes, coming up on that first year and second year, there may be times where, especially people who have lost children, where they would have graduated or they would have gone to college, all of those things that they would have done. And what I say to people is to begin when you're having moments where you're okay, in those okay moments, to plan forward as to how you're going to navigate those spaces and those times, allowing yourself, because the memory, the pain, the longing is still there. So honoring that pain of love, but also creating ways to turn that pain into something that feels ultimately nurturing and that you just don't get stuck there. That maybe that's going to be a rough day, but you still get through it okay, and the next day it's better.
Thank you. The next question, Kimberly, is what's the next step? If we've identified that we're stuck feeling guilty and regret, now what? Is there anything we can do on our own, or do we need to work with a coach like you?
Again, very, very, very individual question. Some people, most people, frankly, figure this out on their own. There's a statistic that about 10% of people find themselves a little stuck or very deeply stuck in prolonged or contracted grief. My own experience is that I think actually that number is higher. It's probably more like 15 or 20%. But I think it depends on the person as to whether or not working with someone. And I think you'll kind of know, like if you have tried the usual things, I've tried this and I've tried that, and these things help for a while, or they help again in those early days so you get some coping. But I don't think most of us want to cope 24/7 for the rest of our lives. We cope through rough patches, but we want to actually live through most of our life, right? So I think that's a very personal decision as to whether or not to work with a psychotherapist or, a social worker, a counselor, a mentor, coaching person such as myself. My focus, for instance, and I think maybe I'll answer this question that's underlying that question, Sam, which is sometimes people say, what's the difference between therapy and, say, coaching or mentoring? And the difference is often with therapy and certain kinds of therapeutic counseling and social work approaches, you may spend more time looking back, dealing with sort of the fact pattern of what happened. And that can be really important with trauma. There's you have to be very careful with that, but there's a part of that. When we're talking about coaching and mentoring and the people that I work with, I certainly help them with coping things too. But when you get to the point where you say, okay, I want to feel better. I want to live again. I want to feel, I'm always going to love this person and I'm going to feel wounded on and off for the rest of my life. But how do I get back to feeling like my life has a sense of purpose and meaning? So, so I think that's where you start to look at things like coaching and mentoring and other kinds of programs that are more forward-looking, that help you sort of take yourself into the future. So I hope maybe that gives a little bit of context for that question, which was really very good.
Sure. I'm going to put two together. And as I said, we'll get through as many as we can. And you may need to follow with Kimberly directly. The next one was, how do you deal with numbness, can't cry, can't grieve? And then I just want to circle back the first question that I asked. I'm sorry, I keep skipping. About dementia and grief, especially when the person has dementia and is at the end of life, terminal cancer. They're kind of asking, how do you deal with that grief as well? So the first one is just.
Could you explain that first question a little bit? By the time I got to the second question, I lost the thread on the first question.
Yeah, okay. So let me do one at a time. I'm sorry. I was just trying to. Let me just go back to the first, and then I will go to the second.
Sure. Yeah.
Let me just get there. I'm sorry. It's someone who says, how do you deal with numbness, can't cry? So let's start there, and then we'll go back.
Okay. The first thing I want to say is sometimes you don't have to. I think we live in a society, and it depends on, the context and the people around you and your culture and your own belief system. But I know a lot in terms of the environment that I live and work in and the people that I interact with. There's this expectation that if you're grieving, you're going to be crying and you're going to be emoting. And, there's actually there actually are different griever styles. That's a conversation for another day. But some of us are big emoters. Some of us are big, we are going to cry more. For some people, there is a tendency to kind of hold it in. They're feeling it in here at some level, but they're not emoting. So the first thing I want to say is, if the question is around, sometimes we feel pressured to be like, why are you not acting more emotional? That may be part of your own innate grieving style. Now, the other side of the question that I'm also hearing is, but I'm feeling numb. I'm feeling empty. I'm feeling, I can remember feeling hollow. I can remember sitting in a meeting. I was in a leadership role when I was going through this bad grief period. And I can remember sitting there thinking, putting on a really good face, but inside my brain's like, who cares? Why does this matter? What's going on? I was just really having a hard time focusing because, it was that feeling of, the world's going on without me. And I think a lot of times when you have that numb feeling, it's that feeling of, the world is going on and I don't know how I fit into it anymore. And I just feel very isolated and inside myself. I would say if that's a prolonged thing, sometimes that's a healthy way of protecting yourself, just literally self-protecting, because the pain is so deep. So part of it is your mind, emotions, body, and spiritual self, to the extent you believe in that, are literally trying to be protective. Now, if you are staying in that place long term, then yes, there are some approaches, again, whether that's through counseling or therapy or other kinds of approaches that I could recommend. But, again, I don't like to recommend specific approaches without knowing more the context of the story here. But if you're feeling really stuck in that, you don't want to live your whole life feeling numb, like the world's going on, but I can't really touch it or feel it. Then part of it is having understanding where that's coming from first. And then there are some approaches to begin to break through that and open up space for feeling again. And feeling can be painful. Sometimes numbness feels better than feeling other kinds of feelings. That's not exactly the answer you probably want, but it's the real answer. It just really depends on where you are and what that numbness is about.
Do you have any advice for how to use your concept with parents, family who have just recently experienced the sudden death of their daughter, sister through suicide, drug abuse? Any specific words of comfort you might recommend?
Okay, I'm going to be really, really candid here, which is that is a landmine. And I'll tell you why. There are all kinds of articles. I could point to all kinds of articles that different people have written. Never say this, always say this, avoid this. And what I find is it depends on the people and it depends on you. And I know that there are some people who said, if another person asks me how I'm feeling, I'm going to strangle them. They hate that question. And then I know other people who say, not a single person has asked me how I'm doing. And you'll read a lot out in the literature about avoiding asking people how they're feeling. And again, unless you know that person pretty well, it can be a difficult question. You can make them really upset because their answer is, I'm feeling awful. I lost my child. Or thank you for asking, and then the question is, if you ask, are you really ready? Many people, even if they hear a genuine question of expressing concern or condolence or wanting to know how they're doing inside, are afraid to even share that because they don't know how you're going to respond and they don't know if you're going to be able to handle it. And so people kind of, can be stoic at that point. What I would say is, instead of focusing on what can I say, just really focus on witnessing and listening. So if you're with that person, the other thing I would say is, I have yet to meet a single person, with one exception, where there was a very abusive relationship. Every other situation is, people often are afraid to say the beloved's name, the one who's died name, the child's name, the spouse's name. People want to hear the voice. They want to hear the name of the one they love. So it's absolutely okay to say, our hearts go out to you in the loss of Mary, Maria, Pablo, whatever that person's name is, and just say, I want you to know I'm here. I'm just here. I'm happy to just sit with you for a bit in your grief. I'm here. And just, you don't have to say a whole lot, and let them know there's a window opening. But to try to give people specific phrases, I've seen, for every phrase I've heard you shouldn't say, I've heard people say they were upset. The only thing I would definitely avoid are things like, unless that person is deeply faith oriented and has that faith system, things like they're in a better place. Most people do not believe their loved one. Even pretty deeply faithful people don't believe their loved one's in a better place, because they believe the better place is right here with them. So that's why I say, unless you know people really, really well, the best thing is just to say, my heart goes out to you. I see the loss. I share the loss with you, and I'm here for you. I am here. And just listen to whatever they want to say. And if you can just hold that, sometimes when someone does let their grief out, it unlocks grief in ourselves and losses in ourselves. So go in for yourself. Sometimes it helps for you to explore your own feelings about loss and grief, so that you create space for someone to really say whatever they need to say. And you don't have to fix them, but just to hear it and to say, I hear what you're saying. I hear it. I'm witnessing what you're saying. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing that I had with someone. I just said something automatic. Have a nice holiday or have a nice weekend. And she said, don't use adjectives. It's not a nice weekend. I'm not happy. And to your point, it's to ask them how they're doing, or don't assume or don't assume it's good. And she really just framed it for me to really what you're saying is that we need to acknowledge the situation and see how it goes. I want to come back to, because we have a lot of people want to know
that initial question. Yeah, we had that initial question too.
How do you help someone with dementia grieve? And people are very interested. How can you help someone with dementia grieving? That's the first question that came up. And we've had a lot of people wanting to come back to that. So that'll probably be the last one, but I'll let you answer that. And if there's time for one more, I have one more.
Okay. Well, of course, it depends on what are they grieving? Because I can see a couple things here. They're grieving, what's happening to themselves, their own loss of themselves and their capacity. And, depending on how old they are and how far along in life they are, it can be magnified, right? Not that it's any easier when you're 85 than 45. So there's that grieving of the self and of the losses that dementia brings. Then there's also, they may be, maybe they've lost somebody, or maybe they're looking, turning on the news and they're seeing pretty awful stuff out there. So there's many different levels. So I'm not quite sure, where they are. And it depends on where they are in their dementia too. I mean, as we know, it's a very nuanced condition that some people can move through, accelerate fairly rapidly, and others it can be a very slow process. So again, it depends on what they are cognitive, to the extent that you can have, assuming this is a mild to moderate form of dementia. And again, I'm not a dementia expert, so caveat, but I have worked with people, and I have this in my own personal life, right? So I think, to the extent that you can do, just as we did talking about loss in general, which is, do you want to talk about it? Is there anything you want to talk about? Is there anything you'd like to share? If it's grieving sort of their own loss, inviting people to talk about it. Now they may not want to, or they may not be able to. The other thing I would say is, if you're not sure, like if somebody is feeling like they may be struggling with grief, but they may not be able to articulate it as well, certainly asking permission. Would you like me to X? If they're grieving a person, would you like to pull out a photo album and you can tell me a little bit about Mary? Just finding ways to tap into what their memory is holding and what they're able to articulate. But it's really a hard question to answer with more specifics, like to give you a really specific example, just because it would depend on where somebody is in their dementia pathway and the nature of what they are grieving. But I would say, for the most part, we start as human beings, and we start as empathetic and compassionate human beings, and we can often start with just listening and creating space for someone to just is there anything you'd like to talk about? I want you to know that, my heart is with you. And all I can say is sometimes saying a little bit less, I've caught myself in this and put my own foot in my own mouth, making assumptions about how someone might feel. Like a person with dementia might say, oh, I can imagine how difficult it is to feel, you losing parts of yourself. And someone could say, yes, you get it. And other people could say, that's not how I'm feeling. So the other thing is, we have a tendency to assume how we would feel about a situation is how somebody else is. And the emotions can be quite difficult. Sometimes, again, depending on the nature of the dementia too, sometimes there may not be the same facial gestures, hand gestures, much like with Parkinson's, can be very easy to misread how someone is feeling. We might even assume that they're not feeling well, or they're having a bad day, and they're actually just fine. So just being able to use questions that invite them to let us know what they need, and then to be open to actually listening, to just sitting in the grief. Sometimes the number one thing you can do is just, if they're open to touch, say, can I take your hand? And just sit there together and look out the window. Notice the birds at the bird feeder, and just be. We don't do enough of that, especially since COVID.
We have a minute left, and we have some other questions. If people send me an email, I can certainly pass them on. And I've responded to a couple of people. There's 2 or 3 things that people have raised, and I'm happy to speak about that further. I want to thank Kimberly. This is just a perspective. I'm open to other people and other disciplines coming in and having this conversation. We are just bringing things with no expectation, except that it's just information that may help people. And our only goal here is to share that. And I'm happy to talk further about how that looks. So, Kimberly, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We will continue. This is an ongoing series. And let me know what is important to you and helpful, not only questions, but further programming besides just tax-wise giving strategies, which we also do. So with that in mind, Kimberly, please, I'll give you the last word and say thank you.
Well, again, I just want to say my heart goes out to everyone here. We didn't have a chance. I just looked at some of the questions around anticipatory grief, which is something I know a whole lot about personally. And there are some other questions about, additional components of this presentation that, we're not going to have time to get to today about how we can use the pathway practices, but please feel free to reach out to me at the information that Sam has shown. And please, if nothing else, remember that breath practice at the beginning, breathing in, slow and deep, remembering the one you love with gratitude, and then breathing out and reminding yourself, I'm still here. So wishing you all much love and light on your journey with loss. Thank you so much, everyone there, and Sam, and so many behind the scenes here at Compassionate Choices, which does such important work.
We put our contact information out there. Please reach out to me or to Kimberly. And the only expectation is that we want to help you if we can and give you the resources and perspective that may give you some joy from grief and peace. So thank you again. Be well, be safe, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you all.